this time, we're gonna call the policy council meeting to order. We'll go over the policies and amendments and make proper adjustments if necessary. If not, we'll leave them as they are. Oh, okay. Thank you.
No, I did the bottom.
Oh, that is. Yes, okay. At this time, we'll look at policy ADM, district wellness update. Who wants that?
Thank you, Mr. Murdoch. You do have several policies here as related to health and wellness. We have Ms. Ellen Fick with us. Her department, along with her committee, have gone through these and have made the recommendations. As always, if you'll look through on the form that Ms. Strobel has given you that lists the policies, it tells you whether it's an update or whether it's new.
Okay.
And if you look at the policy, you'll see strike-throughs, which is in the old policy, and blue will be telling you what's new and has been added. So I'll let Ms. Fitch, if she would like to share very quickly. I think that a lot of this is just added addendums to the end where there's major changes added to it. But I'll let Ms. Fitch go over her committee and findings.
Good evening. The board policy was adopted over 3 years ago and approved, and then each year we review it at our CSHAC meetings, and Student Concerns Director, Dr. Jenkins, is the lead over the district to make sure everyone is following it. As of this year, we had not made a whole lot of updates to it, but some things have already been established and adhered to, and some things weren't being adhered to. And we had to do, and each year we have to do an annual assessment of our wellness policy and how the district meets those criteria. And every 3 years we have to do a triennial assessment. So this year, well actually in 20 was our due date for the triennial assessment. I could have applied for a waiver, but I chose not to and submitted our assessment so that we could get some feedback in order to make these updates for this year, because we received a waiver last year, but I opted out of receiving the waiver and went ahead and submitted. We received back some feedback from the State Department of things that needed to be addressed. And so we made all of the adjustments, and then I went ahead and submitted our triennial assessment. It was due by June 30th, with the knowledge that this could not be approved, be final until July. So she sent back a couple of more suggestions, and we went ahead and tweaked it based on that. And so we've had to update a few areas within the policies, and then we've had to add some appendixes that would give us a little more leeway to allow us to be compliant, because our schools have not been completely compliant when it came to serving certain things related to this policy. So we added in some school events that would give them an exemption, so that they could still meet our wellness policy, but still allow certain times, like holiday events, celebrations, or, it was like there's 4 in here in the appendixes that will allow the schools around the holidays, 4 events where they do not have to meet Smart Snack compliant items, and it also gives them a choice of 2 per year at their own discretion. At the administrator at the school level can decide on those 2 per year. And then the 4 that are set up in here and designated. And then a few other things that had to be removed, like instead of saying we will establish, that we have established, because now it's 3 years later, we have established guidelines, and now we needed to remove the wording and the verbiage saying that we would work on this, and change it so that we have established these criteria. And that's basically it. in the wellness policy, and then there's appendixes that go with that, and different things that the public and then the schools themselves that will be responsible for will need to know. And then we go into the EFE policy. We just had to remove some wording from that policy to make sure it's compliant at this point. And that's EFE, policy EFE. And then the administrative rule EFE-4, we just changed some of the verbiage and the end of that to make it compliant with what we're doing now in the district. And then we added the appendix A through D, which are actually school level requirements for requesting exempt fundraisers, and the ruling behind that, and then how they determine whether things meet Smart Snack in the school level, and then who's responsible for, the school is responsible for keeping documentation and records that can be pulled for an audit at any time. So it's basically the instructions and the manual for the district as well as the school level to make sure that we're all compliant with our wellness policy. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
That won't include like, athletic games or different things like that.
Our wellness policy allows at 30 minutes after the school day ends until midnight that night, they do not have to meet this policy. So it's always 30 minutes after the school day ends until midnight that night, they're not a part of this. This is only for during the school day and 30 minutes to an hour after school ends for the day. Like after school snack. And then once that period of time ends, they no longer have to meet that. For school, football games and athletics and different things that go on at night, they do not have to meet this.
So for after-school programs, those would fall underneath this change?
At least, and from what I remember and looking through this, my brain has been on this for the last 3 months. So I think it's 30 minutes after the school day ends. So each school is 30 minutes after their dismissal time.
Okay.
And after school snack is right after, but then some of them in the programs offer things after that 30 minutes, and that does not have to meet this.
On the vending machines, and I'm sure it's in here, just looking over it, we supply those now.
Yes, we do, and those are required to meet Smart Snacks within the schools.
And we own
That the
those,
students have access to.
and we own those machines.
I think we have a contract
Contract, okay. Like a lease term thing, okay.
with,
Our company comes in and furnishes and does all that, under the contract, but they have to meet the guidelines set forth in our policy, or the principal would tell them they are no longer available to have them.
No more Coca-Cola machines and candy machines.
They have them, but they don't have
they have Smart Snack
smart
compliant items in
snacks
them.
in those companies now that they're required to follow.
I'm grinning.
No more french fries though.
No French
Right.
fries in there?
Not during school day.
Do these changes, these are coming from the School Board Association?
This is coming from the state, USDA.
Okay. Has the School Board Association looked at these and recommended these? These are their policies in model.
Yes, that's, well, Dr. Juanita Bowens at the State Department.
So at the School Board Association.
Right, at the School Board Association, as far as I know, they're the ones that developed this wellness policy to begin with.
So my question is, who's made these, how did these changes come to us?
From the State Department.
The State Department
The State Department, I sent them an assessment of our wellness policy based on the guidelines where this was established over 3 years ago. And when I assessed it with what our district was doing to meet those requirements, that was done by the School Board Association, then I had to make corrections, making sure our policy stayed up to date and compliant.
So when the changes are made, does it go back to them and get approved, or how?
When I sent this to her, our suggested changes, she had to go by that based on the wellness policy to make sure everything met. And then that's when she sent the suggestions back to me on what needed to be changed, tweaked, everything. And then I sent in the verbiage, and the last email I got from her said, I do not need to send it back. We had discussed it over the phone and said, this is, all that was left was a couple of things, and we made those changes while she was on the phone with me. And I have all those emails I can forward to.
Yeah, if you haven't gone, I mean, if you haven't gone through the school board association, I would prefer that they look at this first, because we want to be consistent on these model policies with all the other school districts that adopt them, rather than doing multiple pages of our own thing that may be sometimes they lag in making changes, but then when they do make the change, if we've already done our own thing, then we've got to go and redo the whole thing.
Right.
And so, that would just be my recommendation, from that standpoint. Also, let me ask you, the smart snacks, that's a federal regulation?
That's a federal regulation, and we had to do this original policy because of that.
How long has that been in existence?
It's been existing since, August of 17.
Okay, and before that, what predated that?
The Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act,
Okay, how long was that in existence?
2010.
So is there a way we can write this policy where we don't have to completely rewrite it every time the federal government decides they're gonna change whatever the flavor of the day is?
That's why I didn't rewrite the policy. The only thing I did was take out the verbiage that said the district will establish standards.
Right, but it's got reference to.
That's why I did that, because these are our updates. The definitions are just things that are listed there, in there, so that when people read it, they know what those definitions are for, because it's within the policy. And then the smart snack exempt foods, that's within the policy. And then those.
Already existing is what you're saying.
Exactly.
I got it.
Yes, and so anytime there's updates, the reason why I did it in this format is because anytime there's updates, we can change the appendixes, because those are ours. That's just referring to what's in the policy.
You're talking about these sheets.
Yes, those are referring to what's in the policy.
The appendix, I think you're right.
That one,
That's the policy.
Did you set the
Has
policy?
definition, just
Okay,
like-
yeah, I see appendix.
Yeah,
and that was why I did it in the appendix, was to prevent changing their policy. I didn't want to change their policy.
Our policy.
Right, it's our policy, but this was established by the School Board Association, where we had to create this policy based on their recommendations. Originally, in August of 17, that's when ours was approved. But that was the first initial of this, and the only thing I've changed in it was that verbiage at the bottom of the original policy.
But I mean, that really changes everything, because then you adopt the appendices.
Well, the appendixes, though, refer to everything within this policy.
When is this due again? We should have it in place by July 1.
It should be, but I've already informed them that it would not be approved final reading until the July board meeting. So June 29th will be a first reading, and then the July meeting will be the second reading and the approval. Right.
Just wanted to,
And the appendix, like I said, the appendix, if we entered this into this policy, we would have to continuously change this policy. But we could remove the appendix or change the appendix as needed, but all of this,
If it's an appendix to this policy, that's a change to the policy.
well, yeah, but what I'm saying is there's no reason to change this. Most of these are just telling what these are. You know what I'm saying? It's still within the policy. All of these things are listed in the policy. They're basically just assistance for the schools and for people reading the policy. It's basically letting them know these are ways to double check and to check whether the things are meeting the smart snacks that are listed there.
Have they ever amended the smart snacks legislation itself?
No.
I'm not trying to trick you, the reason I'm
No,
asking
I understand what you're saying.
we typically don't like to draft policies that are specific to a current regulation, because it'll change. And so if we can draft a policy without including language from the regulation or specifics, then we don't have to change the policy every time. In other words, these appendices may actually could end up being just your internal policies that are adopted by the board that we can change regular rather than being. And I don't know enough about it to know that.
I know that, I understand what you're saying, but I know that we do not meet the wellness policy if we don't have these within our policy. This right here talks about the smart snacks. In the policy, it refers to the smart snacks. And then the smarter lunchroom was changed. That was one regulation that the school board has changed since this took place on page 2 of the policy, where I was told to change that to best practices because it changed from smarter lunchroom techniques to best practices. And that was done based on the school board association. They no longer use the smarter lunchroom techniques, they use best practices instead.
And the appendices themselves, the language in each of them, A, B, and C, who drafted that?
That was drafted by me and student concerns and Nurse Dingle. But we used other school districts as guides, like, that's where we got this from.
Learn my secret.
I was given several school districts' policies to use, and these came from that. And then things were removed that no longer meet the School Board Association's wellness policy. They were removed and then corrected to meet. And like I said, most of these appendix are just referring to things within the policy so that people understand what they mean. A la carte, competitive foods, fried foods. You know, when we say those things, that's within the policy, things that just helps them to understand the policy. And then the smart snack exempt foods, that would be foods that do not meet smart snacks within the school, and then these are exemptions. School nurses exempt the smart snack regulation from the School Board Association by, having to deal with, like, giving candy to a diabetic. Accommodating students with special needs, sometimes we have to give them things that may not meet the regulations. School events, those 6 school events that I spoke about, we were not being compliant with our wellness policy because we stated that we would not serve or sell anything that did not meet within our policy. To become compliant, we had to add that caveat in for those 6 events because schools were doing it anyway. So if they were going to do it anyway, we wanted to make sure that we were compliant by allowing that within our policy. And that's where that came from. And then parents' rights. We can't tell parents what to send in their children's lunchbox. So we had to make sure that was in there. All of those things are within the policy. That just kind of defines it out for their understanding.
When we get in trouble, a parent, would we have a problem with a parent sending lunch to their child and their child sharing it with another student? Is that a problem?
Yes, it's a problem, but we can't prevent a child sharing what they have with another child, but it can cause problems with allergies or
Yes.
medical conditions. And that's something that wouldn't really have anything to do with this.
Okay.
Right.
That's
Yes, sir.
Your recommendation is that Chris sends it back to the School Board Association for review.
I mean, I can check. I can just check it against their policy.
Yeah, everything's been created based on the original wellness policy that we had to meet in order to be compliant. And then the EFE was in there. The EFE policy was established, and we were told to remove these things that no longer met the requirements of the School Board Association. The foods of minimal nutritional value.
Okay.
That noted that had to be
Could I
removed.
ask you, the requirement, see, I think there's a confusion over what you mean, the State Department of Education?
The State Department, but the State Department has to follow, this was established by the School Board Association. back when we originally did this. So everything we do relates back to that.
You're talking about this policy? Right, okay.
Yes.
Who's telling you that?
Dr. Juanita Bowen Seabrook, she's over the Healthy Schools, the Healthy Schools. It used to be, they changed the names of it. When we developed this, it's changed since then, the name of it.
For the
And,
State Department?
Dr. Juanita Bowen works for the State Department, and she's over that for the state.
Y'all had this out of conference?
This is something we've done ever since
These recommendations
17.
that she's given now?
the recommendations. No, I have a triennial assessment I have to do based on this wellness policy to make sure we're continuing to be compliant in our school district. So every year I have to do an annual assessment, and then every 3 years I have to do a triennial assessment to make sure that we're still compliant with the wellness policy that was established, and then any updates needing to be made have to be made annually and triennially.
I'm just trying to understand, like in this policy, we're talking EFE, with the striking lines,
Yes,
who's recommending?
Dr. Bowles.
When,
Yeah.
how did she do that?
Through, when I sent her my assessment, she sent back her suggestions of what needed to be updated within our policy.
Okay, so that was one-on-one. I misunderstood. All right, and so, okay.
We will have further reading on the 29th, am I right?
Yes, sir.
And that gives you enough time to try.
I mean, I can reach out to them as well if you like.
It would just help if I'm in on the front end of board policy changes.
I agree.
Because,
I agree with that.
because these do not get, no board policy gets changed lightly. So, you know, we need to make sure that every part of it is gone through. I can't recommend something that I haven't even looked at or don't even know or haven't been involved in, which I think is not too issue, I understand that.
No, I'm only here to answer questions about why this is being done. I don't really even handle present policies for the school board. I just know that I'm handed a lot of stuff in food service that I really don't usually handle. But because I handle the triennial assessment of this, that's where this came into play. And I was kindly told that we had not updated it in 3 years. And I was not aware of that, so I've been working diligently for the last 3 months to get this updated. To bring it to the school board in order to do that. And so that's what this is. I would not change the policy. I'm updating what I was suggested to update. That's what that is coming from.
Are these changes are like statewide?
They're not, that's what my.
Yes, they are statewide. Every district has to do this every year.
I think what she's asking is, are the same changes being made in other districts? Same language is what we're saying.
Same language, not exact same, no.
That's what.
All right, not exact same. This is exactly the same. And then how we redid this for our district down at the bottom may be worded differently. And some districts may not allow anything other than Smart Snack. But that's where it comes into play. Each district can allow as little or more to make sure that they're compliant within their own district. But we can't change we can't change the gist of the policy. We can change how we do it in our district and how we meet these
I
requirements.
have a question, maybe a great question, but as a parent seeing these policy changes, and they know how their children actually eat at home, can they protest any of this to say, I want my child to have something different? How would we handle this?
Parents can provide their child anything they would like to
So
provide them.
then they can send it here and wherever they want them to have, so it won't be a conflict under those circumstances.
Right, parents can, that's what we said in here, parents' rights to feed their children whenever they want.
So what if they ask that we have a canteen, a vending machine that will accommodate some of the things?
Can't do that.
That wouldn't be our, that can't, see, those are things we cannot change.
I'm just asking questions that I think some parents
Oh,
would
yeah,
want to
I
ask,
agree.
so that's one.
But those are things we cannot change because that's mandated by USDA guidelines.
I'm
Never
just,
should have took out them soy burgers and french fries.
And I understand exactly what you're saying about the school board association. I just know that this was established by them, and each year we have to make sure we're compliant with what was established. And for us to be compliant, that's where some of this other stuff comes in, to make sure we're compliant. Not changing their policy,
In other words, our portion of.
or their regulations for our
Compliant
policy.
is when we put that in, letting the parent know this is what this means, and then turns around and says, if you have an issue to send something different with your child, you have that right. But we're not gonna supply it for this one particular individual, we're following a specific policy in order for what we provide our students.
Right. And some of this in here, like I said, I could have written this and all of these things that are appendix, I could have put within this policy. I can do that. And then it's up to the school board to approve it. I chose this route because of, like Bert, I don't wanna have to keep going back and changing this. I'd rather remove or change appendixes as those things change. Because those are done basically just as a definition of what's in there. And so you can't, I mean, these are all things, like A and B, the only thing that B does is explains what our exemptions are under that smart snack rule. That's all B is doing, is explaining what our exemptions are as a district. And then Appendix A is just definitions of things that we have said within the policy. Definitions so they would understand what a la carte, competitive foods, and fried foods. And then and then C here is just more examples of smart snack compliant items. So it gives them a suggestion of what does meet the smart snack guidelines. And then it gives them the calculator, or the link to the calculator to try things themselves. The teachers and the staff at the school can put in that calculator and check any snack that they're trying to sell to make sure it meets. And so that's what this is for. This is all just additional, my mind's blank for a second, but guidance, additional support for that. That's what these are. And then the competitive food sales was already in there, our policy. And from Dr. Bowen's, she was the one that removed these items here. She said to remove those in the email, where it struck through on policy EFE.
Did she give her basis for that?
Yeah, she said that it's obsolete now within the policy from the School Board Association for the wellness policy. She said it was obsolete. As a matter of fact, she said I could have removed it completely, but then the AREFE-R, because that states basically the same thing. But that's our administrative rule with the information describing everything in the smart snack. That's what the administrative rule, and then down at the bottom, where we're adding in, that's part of that original policy. And the memo from the state that allowed the 30 exempt fundraisers, we had to put that in there because that came about after this wellness policy was passed. And we had never updated that, once that new rule came about for the 30 exempt fundraisers, not to exceed 1 day in length.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask Mrs. Scoble a question? Mrs. Scoble, is it that when the board approves a policy, do you send that to the School Boards Association, and do they review it and then send it back to us saying it meets the standards, or if they don't say that?
No, we don't normally do that. We just send what, usually the policies come from the School Board Association. We change, approve, and then I send the changes to, the board has made, I send them to the School Board Association, and they take care of it and put it up on the website
After the second read.
after the second reading. So,
I'd like for us to, for Bert to get back to us before we go through the first reading on it, if you can.
I agree, because I think that would make sure that y'all understand that we're not changing anything within
That's
the
right.
policy. We're just making sure that we're compliant as a district with what's in that policy. Right, I agree.
And, that's my thoughts on it, you know,
Sounds good. Rather ask a question and get an answer than, get a question in the end and not have an answer.
And I can look back through my emails and the verbiage that she says in her emails may say that. I was focused on making sure we met, not the policy itself, because I knew this was established by the School Board Association originally, and that's why we have to do the assessment every year to make sure that we're meeting it.
Well,
So I didn't focus on that part of it.
I'll say that, like with the appendix, it is good not to have to go in and specifically change the policy, because as it says, that just gets rather tedious sometimes. But with the appendix, given more or less a description, definition, example of what it is that to be followed, I like that idea, because it's a little easier to change the appendix than it is actually going to replace the policy. But it's all got to stick up.
See, the thing,
I must be confused. This appendix is part of this policy, is it not?
Yes,
the appendix
So that means
is,
every time you change the appendix, you've
you
got
got to change the policy.
Correct.
Right. Yeah.
That's what
I understand what you're saying. I also want y'all to realize that these appendix right here, this has always been,
Let me ask, what's the recommendation if we're not, the State Department's giving us, and telling us what we have to have to meet the criteria and the guidelines set forth, and what she's having to do, and part of that is your policy has to be,
yeah, it has to
they
be
approve
updated every
your
year.
policy and say, are you meeting those criteria? Your policy stating what you're doing, so if we don't have it in there, how are we gonna meet the State Department's guidelines? That's where I'm having some issues. We're updating.
Nobody's saying that. The issue is you have policy language that's written by Ellen without review by the School Board Association or your board attorney to determine if the policy is correctly written in accordance with what those laws are that you're referencing, or anything.
But didn't have the purpose of what we're here for tonight.
Well, I mean, how can I advise you on this if I'm seeing it for the first time
Like
tonight?
Mr. Murdoch says, you can then send it back.
That's what I'm saying.
But
Yeah,
I
I
guess,
don't have
I understand that part, I don't have any issue with there, but for her, what would have been better for her to bring back, for the policy to meet what she's been asking the State Department?
I think
And what we have in the policy.
Any district level person who is amending policy, it needs to come through me. After you've added language, for language review, for review to make sure that the language complies with whatever the law requirement is. We normally don't have that as a difficult process because we're operating off a
It
model
comes from the board.
that comes from the School Board Association. When we're not operating off of a model, we have to be very, very careful with language that we're out there on our own with. And so that is what I think should have been done, or could have been done, not should have been done, we're gonna do it, so it's not a problem.
Right.
But it could have been done, if that's what your question is.
It is.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. I didn't know,
There's no
I didn't amend,
How
I haven't asked to amend anything.
How can the school board here, this policy committee, determine that this language is appropriate if we don't even know what the statutory or law basis for the change is? You can't, right? So you gotta know that. Normally they know that because,
You know,
right, we looked at it.
Right, I was told that we're supposed to be updating this annually, is what I was told. And we had not updated or made any changes to our wellness policy since it was established over 3 years ago. I then took it and went to the person that is listed in our wellness policy as being the responsible party for that. And I was told that I know more about it, so work on this. And I did, and now I am presenting it. I'm not asking you to make changes unless you are 100% sure. What I'm telling you is what I was told to do, and I'm submitting that. And then going to the school board to make sure that we are compliant. I would say that's a good idea, because I can tell you from personal experience, not everything I get from the State Department is, I can talk to one person today and get something else tomorrow. happens all the time. So I have no doubt that going to the school board association just to make sure that what we've put in here meets these needs. I did this based on my triennial assessment and the suggestions I received back. Getting this approved and passed, I was told to take the lead on this, and that's what I'm doing.
Superintendent and executive director didn't tell us to send it to you, so we'll make sure in the future, we haven't had that issue come up before, so. She didn't know that, she's never presented.
No, and I'm not
And I'm
assuming
not
to know
aware in the
anything
last
about that.
several years that a policy's been presented that has had wholesale changes handwritten by a staff member. So you wouldn't have had that come that direction, because that's not what, I'm not aware of that we've done that. Not saying nothing bad.
No, I know
It just has
exactly
to-
what you're saying.
The legal side of it is a little more,
But that's,
And the policy itself, I don't see really any substantive change to the policy, so, you know, when you talk about compliance, it appears the policy is in compliance, because you haven't really changed anything in the policy language itself.
Yeah, the policy's in compliance, the district has not been in compliance with the policy, and then we had to just tweak a few words in it to make sure that we've updated our policy to meet, we can't say that we can't say that we're working towards establishing a policy when we've done it 3 years ago. And that's what our word said at the bottom.
Okay, right, the policy itself, I don't see any real substantive changes to it.
No.
So are you telling me that the policy is good, but the implementation and procedures utilized by the district are what needs to be updated? Is that what we're saying?
Needs to be updated, and that's what those are in the appendix. It's
And so what's
basically
the-
explanations of what,
I got it. What's the need to put that into the policy itself? Is that?
because those are those required documentation and different things like that. I don't, only thing I know is what I was told to do by the state. And getting it approved by the school board association would, in my opinion, would be a good idea, because all of these things are in other school districts' policies right now. What I've added,
separately,
we were missing.
separately like this?
Right, the appendix, we were missing. But it's within other school districts' policies. The ones that are in compliant, that's the ones that I chose to,
Well,
look
I
at.
asked you if they were in other policies, and you said no, that you had handwritten. You had written these.
no. Some of this I had to change that was already within our policy. Some of this is already in there. But it had to be reworded in the appendix, like some of these things are already within our policy.
Yeah.
And then, so I got the appendix from another school district, some of these appendix, and then made them ours to match, to make sure we were compliant. So I can pull those school districts up and send them to you, their exact policies, and then you can see that some of these are exact. Especially the EFE.
No, well, I mean, that's good. I know, like I said, I normally do that too. What I'd like to see, I guess, if you won't pull anything for me, is the communications with the State Department people.
Okay.
That is what would really, help me see where they're coming from.
I can
And-
forward
and then
all
I
of that to you if you would
I
like.
can look at the references that they make, whatever state regulation or federal regulation they make reference to, then I can look at that and determine, and if other districts have this language, it may be that this is a model language, but I don't know how that could be the case and it didn't come to us. I'm not sure about that, but we'll find out. I mean, it's not that big a deal.
It's not, I would say it's not this was a model when we did it in 3 years ago. Yeah, well, almost 4 years ago now. This was the model, the original policy. Annually, we have not received a model from the School Board Association, but we've been charged with updating it every year. And since I wasn't the lead on that, I was basically monitoring the school district and monitoring the schools to make sure that we met it, and where we didn't meet it, I would put that on my assessment. But now, this year, since it was the triennial, which means the first triennial assessment in 20, that's whenever we had to go back in now and make the changes. And so that's where I think you're needing that information of why now. is because it was the first triennial assessment since we established a wellness policy in 17 as a district. And the district did that based on the model.
Mr. Chairman
Yes, sir.
and Mrs. Fitch, I think, let us go through Mr. Duffy here and let him run it through the department, the School Boards Association,
Agreed.
and then I think we'll be fine.
Oh, yeah.
We appreciate all the work that
Oh,
you've
yeah.
done. I read it thoroughly, and the changes that were made were necessary, as I read it, just to be not necessarily in compliance, but to make us be doing what we're doing in the district. If we were not doing, I think it'll come out clearly, and he just needs what he needs to have
I agree.
to make sure to sign off on this, and I understand that.
I agree.
We
Do
appreciate your effort.
you have a school district email?
Yeah.
All right, you want me to just send it to your email? All right, I'll forward it, all of it to you, and then we can send it to him. And then, anything else that we go through? Are there any other questions about anything within?
I think that's covered it. I think that's covered it. Thank you. We appreciate all that.
All right, I appreciate you.
I couldn't have typed that much, so yeah.
Well, no, like I said, a lot of these came from other school districts' policies that were compliant, that were suggested, that I used theirs as guidelines, and I did. And, so that's where a lot of that came from.
So it's never really like a meeting, like an associate with all of the district gets together and go over it, just that individually that you send your information and they give you feedback individually?
The food service department has to do that every year. Why it's the student nutrition department, I have no idea. It's just been that way through USDA. We have to do the assessment. The district, student services, Dr. Jenkins is the lead on this, to make sure that the school district is compliant. When I do that assessment, we meet 4 times a year, our CSHAC meeting, the district CSHAC
So
meeting.
that's individual here in our district?
Yes, it's individual here in our district. But the wellness policy is something that is assessed annually across the state. Every school district has to supply that information, and then it has to be updated regularly. We had not updated ours, so that's why I think this seems so much. It wouldn't have been this much, but it hasn't been done in 3 years like it should have been. My assessments are done every year, but this part has not been done, and that's where the suggestions came in that we needed it done.
Okay. Thank you.
Let's see. We on policy ECA, on security systems and video cameras in schools and other district properties.
All right, thank you, Mr. Murdock. This was a policy that was recommended last year. This was recommended by the Director of Technology when we started adding more security cameras throughout the whole district. The recommendation of this committee at that time, and maybe it was at the board meeting, we may not have been the actual committee itself, but it was tabled. And it was brought back up again by the Director of Technology for us to recommend again for consideration if there's things that we need to update, take out, not do, or get more information. This is not a model policy given to us by the School Board Association. This is one that she and her team put together based on other school board policies throughout the state, a similar one. So that is a recommendation.
Well, being that, have our attorney looked at over this one yet?
I read through it, just earlier before we started.
And what you think of it,
I suspect, that it appears everything that's in this policy they're already doing, I think, and it's just a formalization of the procedures that they have, the policy they have in place.
Anybody else got any questions about anything? Mr. Tindall, you want to comment on anything?
Well, I didn't know that why, if it came before you all before, why it wasn't taken into consideration. I was curious about that.
You know what?
It's a well-written policy. I've read it thoroughly.
I don't know, you know, Tim?
Well, when we started getting into a lot of video and really vamping it up, and I think
I
that's.
think it was the same discussion that, we just had, similar to it, just needed to get more background to make sure, since it wasn't a model policy, checking the information. At that time, it wasn't something we had to have, it's still not something, I mean, I think it clearly states who has custody of the video, those kind of things. When we first started with all these, the principals were giving out, they have access to the cameras. They were taking stuff, and were they the ones supposed to be giving somebody that? So now it gives one sole person that responsibility of accessing, giving out, going through whatever the policy states that needs to happen. I think that's good. Anytime you have good, clear expectations and directions in writing, I think it's helpful, and that's what it does for that, whoever's in that responsibility.
Accessibility doesn't actually constitute accountability.
Right.
So in this case, I think it's more or less to be held accountable for the actual use of it. So, and that was not something that we had actually got into a discussion about before.
How does Cliff, how does the access control, which I think is page 3, how does that relate to the cameras, the video and surveillance cameras?
The access control is your door swipes, and that's part of the safety. So if we were trying to pinpoint when someone entered the building, we could go to that door access control and we could find out who went in that door, and that tells us what camera we need to pull up, then we'd be able to search. That gives us one more search criteria to see what's going on.
Bert, you know all of these, because I don't use them.
Right, well, what I'd like to do is, I'm not sure what the Lactation Support Act references to, I would need to look at that. I don't know where that's in the language, but I can look at that, that's not a problem. I'm not sure what the Fair Labor Standards Act references to, but I'll double check all of that, and see, the only thing, we have a Kelly Services reference in here. I just wondered if that could be written in such a way as to not do that, but not name them, but keep one company.
Yeah, maybe
From that standpoint. In other words, if we ever change from Kelly Services or decide to drop that altogether, then you've got to go back and change the policy.
So, I mean, if we take it out to say temporary. that's what
Temporary
you're
So
saying.
we'll work on that. I mean, that's not that big an issue, but it's just something I can see. See, that's what I was saying, the difference between policy, there's a difference between policies and procedures. The policy is the macro, the big plan. The procedure is how you implement it. So when we do our policies, we don't want to get procedure heavy. We want them to have that internally. How they do a procedure to implement your policy should not be in the policy typically itself. Sometimes we do because you have to. But that's what I'm talking about there. But I can look at this. I mean, these are all good practices, what's in here, for sure. We've actually had an issue regarding reporting. This house, that's even current, even fine.
That functionality should be already had in policy, so.
So if any of these cameras go out, how would an individual who's in control know, because sometimes it's like, maybe the Fed went out, something like that, and then we get to a situation where we rely on it. How would we handle a situation like that?
Yeah, well, that's always, when you're dealing with technology, there's always a chance that you're gonna have something not work or go right. You can have it in writing all you want, but technology is technology. We do have people at the schools monitoring the cameras. Someone's designated there to be able to call technology or do a work order as soon as they see a camera down. the technicians go in and try to, as quickly as possible, fix that camera. But with the amount of cameras that we have and technology, they go down, unfortunately. But there's no guarantee of anything working 100%. But we try to make sure that we're staying on top of it. And we've had that happen, where it just happened to, the one that happens the most is on our buses. That's the most outdated system we have, in which we're trying to purchase an updated one. And it seems like every time we have an issue go on, it's on the bus and the camera's something malfunction or something going wrong with it, and that's probably where we need it the most.
That just doesn't happen to y'all. I mean, I can't tell you the number of law enforcement cases where the dash cam is not working or the body cam is, I mean, like you say, that's technology, it happens. I mean, it happens all over, not just us, so, I mean, from that standpoint, it just happens. Let me ask you, Cliff, the policy speaks in terms of video. Is that meant to include video and audio here, or is it just video, or what are we talking about here?
Video and audio.
Clear on that one? The next, policy we will go over is policy BDA, board consultant. And that's the current policy we have in place. And this one that I had a question about, that we need to make sure that, if I decide to bring a consultant in to speak before the board, that it be voted on by the board, before that person can come to speak before the board, especially if we have to pay for it. I think that we need to not just bring somebody in and pay them without having approval by the whole board, whether it's four to three or vice versa. But, it ought to be,
In other words, you don't, in other words, for me to call the consultant to come in and give advice, and then the school district has to pay for it.
Yeah, he's saying that the language where it says the board, and not including the administration, because that's a separate, but where it says the board may enlist the services, that, he's saying that language is ambiguous, because, well, it can be ambiguous because you don't know if it means an individual board member may enlist or make the request, or whether the board has a majority. The technical reading of this is that, the board only acts by majority, so
That's right.
you wouldn't have, individuals have that ability.
That's right.
At least. So we can add language, that basically says, right after the two words, the board, we can say, the
Well,
board.
majority.
By a majority vote. That one requires that the majority approve it, and two requires that the matter come to a public meeting first. So that, because we only have a majority vote at the meeting, so
That's
so
right.
it means it'll be at the meeting,
Meeting.
discussed, and then voted on.
Right.
So we can add by majority vote. And that doesn't apply to the administration, because, he has the ability to, hire consultants as he needs to within the budget.
He has any money he wants to.
Right, as he needs to.
Use his own money, you said.
No, you can spend the money if you see fit.
Yeah, the superintendent should have that.
You got that whole, and then basically just needing to add that wording.
Yeah, I could just add after the board and that on first page, I put my majority vote, and that would take care of that.
Chris, you will take that down. Okay. Any other questions on that? Okay.
I agree.
Okay. Policy, bid, board members' compensation and expenses. This is another one that, I kind of, even though we got in here not to exceed $7,500, I firmly believe that the board should based on a majority vote for board members to attend meetings outside, especially outside the state. I mean, if we gonna go, if a board member wants to go outside the state, he needs to come in and present it to the chair needs to bring it to a vote, and it be voted on. And if we got a, majority vote, and it's all right for them to go, but if you don't, he can go at his own, he or she can go at their own expense. That's my feelings, I don't know how everybody else feels.
I would like to know. Okay. When I served as the director of the region, part of SCSDA, they requires you to attend certain meetings, it's like you have to do about 7, maybe 3. If we have other board members who, are in that category. So we would, I can agree with doing, because I know we need to stay in control of the situation, but how would that affect?
It wouldn't, I don't see it because that's something that you are tasked to do. And if the majority vote don't give you the opportunity to go, and they're electing our duties as board members, and we don't send you to something like that. I feel that way, but, Tim?
I think the point of the question of board approval as SPSEA, yes, that's, you're our representative for this district. They help do that. That is ungranted and willfully given to whoever would expect it. Want to put it that way. So, you want to go? Yeah,
Yes.
well, maybe do that.
And the reason why I brought it to your attention, because I know that we try to keep it in distinguish where one from another, there's going to be questions rise. So I just want to make sure that it is worded properly, so.
Well, right, but in the aspect of that as well, personally, I think most of the information that I've ever needed, I've got within the local South Carolina. When I go to conferences or other stuff, where my job, elect, my job with friends on vacation, anytime to do something sometimes. So I burn vacation days. So I get paid for that way. But I think if you're looking at conferences and they're, Timbuktu or, they're 2 flights away or something of that sort, unless it's a necessity that's relative to something within our district, again, I think we should all know that this is what can be done. I've had my own discussion with board members concerned that travel needs not, board approval because it does not affect our budget. Anytime you spend money, it affects it. Whether it's in the budget or not, it affects the budget. And I want to do my due diligence, because I'm sure all other 6 of our board members want to do as well. But I think in the event if you choose to go to a specific outside our norms, because we have those are local, I think that's very important. But anything outside of the norm, I think it needs to be asked, just recommended that the board give approval or not. But I also think if you go to those conferences and come back, you should give some sort of report to the board and the committee as to what it was about. Hey, I put on this report, or I went to this conference, this is where it was. It just kind of puts you in place to say, this is right.
Which is the third.
You turn around and you have to bring this information back, because the reason we're going is if you learn something and bring
And
something
to better our
back.
district, yes.
That's the important part. But I think that, and again, it's been argued about board approval or not, of $7,500, I guess that's
That's the south, that's it.
per.
Second paragraph.
Well, the budget's $21,000 last year. And we went over. So, the year before, we went over.
We ain't doing that.
It comes to that point.
We're not doing that.
I am more than willing to give my portion to whoever can go to some conference. I am more than willing to do that. But I guess, it's just, I think as a board, if we decide
decide on everything throughout the district as a whole, we should make sure that we're.
You could also look at how many will you approve in a given year, or over a 2 or 3 year period. How many you might support out of the state or whatever. I mean, there are other things you can look at, I'm just.
And again, I know that for working folks that have limited time to do this, we may have one in particular board member that is available to go to all those. And then at that point, heck, if I can't go, you go. That's my opinion, but I do think in all aspects, we're not spending our money, we're spending district's money. And I think in that you need to make sure that the public is aware of what we're spending.
I think, yeah, it must benefit the district.
I think I just think,
I went to Texas to find out that we just don't have the do what the other people in Texas. And you know what? I knew that before I left. So I won't go to Texas no more.
Bert, in that question, it's just adding wordage or verbiage?
Well, I mean, the second paragraph actually, as worded, again, it's the same thing, as worded, requires board approval. What I would do to maybe clarify, any confusion on that is take the board part of it, the first two words of the sentence, and change it to a board member. A board member may attend any meeting or conference in their discretion within the limits of the budget and with the approval of the board. So they have to get approval of the board. The third paragraph deals with reimbursement when on official business. So if a conference or meeting requires attendance, then that's automatic at that point, they get reimbursed. What y'all are talking about is non-required training. That's what I think what you're talking about. So, if we change that first, I mean, it really already has that. So, part of the issue, and it's not Mr. Timothy, I don't think it's really been on his watch, but the district office should not be approving individual board members. Part of this policy should not be approving individual board members to go
They're
on
not.
training.
The only person approving these, travels is the chairperson. The chairperson will the vice chairperson. So the district is not, the district staff is not, in other words, what I'm saying, Mr. Tindall's office is not approving these
So
travels for board members.
But the chair has been, but this is not in compliance with what
Right.
what the policy
Right,
says.
I guess what I'm saying is there needs to be a backstop to that. You're saying the chair has been signing off on it.
Right.
That's what you want to change.
No, I want the chair to sign off on it with board approval. In other words, with a majority board vote.
But the chair's been signing off and not getting.
Not getting board approval.
Prior to, what were we in, 2021 now, 2022?
So that's like, I think what he said is exactly right, that at that point, the chair should, there shouldn't be an acceptance of it, even if the chair signs, unless the board.
Board approval, that's right.
That's what
And
he's saying.
then you don't want the chair to be accused of not allowing someone to go when it's the board's responsibility.
Right.
So we're not really putting the chair in
It's
that
put
bad spot.
responsibility in a bad spot.
Yeah, that's what he's.
In other words, the chair should bring it to the board and vote on it.
Correct.
And the board vote for you to go, that's what the board vote for you to go, bye. But if they don't, you stay home or go on your own. That's fair enough?
That's what the policy says.
That's what it states, yeah. It sounds like it was not being done in practice. So part of that, I still think the change in the first language clears up any mistake in reading it. But it sounds like the practice needs to be cleaned up. But it may, I mean, it may not be.
What
That
about-
was under,
What about when say a board member said, well, we got the budget to do it, but with that word saying and with board approval.
it's gotta be both. It's gotta be both within the limits of the budget and with board approval.
And with board approval.
Now, ultimately, amend the budget.
I would like to, I won't know.
Right, I think the idea of it is you want the public to recognize that y'all create a budget line item and use it.
That's what
Is what
we
this
should,
is.
that's what we should do. So
So,
when we go over budget, then how can we say the general can't go over budget? I mean, that's talking out both sides of your mouth.
well, if he were to, have a line item that he felt like he needed to go over budget, he comes to you and says, I'm gonna make a line item adjustment to
Yes.
here, to here, to here.
And
So he
we-
comes to y'all for that.
And we vote on it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And I mean, if we need it, the handbook.
If it gets to that point, that's
The policy is what's been adopted, okay? So we go beyond that, you have to get permission.
So that's
Okay, this is good warrant, please.
The next one we have is GCCAAA. This is the policy we currently have in place, but we have an employee who has asked that you guys consider a change to the policy. That documentation is provided behind it in the actual policy itself. Just a little history. The policy was updated in 2016 after a lot of review from other policies across the state. It's a mixture, if I can remember correctly, of different things that fit, but for the most part, very consistent to how others were doing it. I think some of the things that some people have issues with, and this employee has issues with, is having to be out of work for so many days before you can even be eligible if you meet all the other criteria. They have an issue with that, but it's, the sick leave bank should be used as an extra thing that's needed in an emergency situation. It shouldn't be something you're going to on every illness or every issue where somebody's out of days. It should be a underlying condition or a situation where you're going to have to go to the bank to be able to ask for those. And that's why if I remember correctly, what was presented in 16, why it was a length of time in there before you can actually be eligible. And then there's other criteria you can read in there as well. You have to put those in place. And as you guys know already, we've had to go through this policy to actually do a renewal to get our days built back up. Because we have to have the days in the bank to be able to issue them out to the employees. So right now it's being utilized quite frequently. It's a good thing. It's good for employees who need it. But we have the guidelines set forth by the board, and there is a request to make that. So we wanted to bring that to y'all's attention that that was a request from an employee.
To change the policy.
She recommends a change. That person is recommending a change. We feel comfortable, the administration feels comfortable with the policy as is.
And I mean, the title says for long-term illness, so if you remove the long-term component, it could just be, somebody would just use their own sick leave, and then every time they got sick after that, they'd be coming for a day or two,
Yeah,
right? Would that be possible?
Correct.
Right. Yeah, that's,
And you
that
can't
kind of
do it.
defeats your purpose, I guess.
Because we have this here in front of us, this employee was injured, used all of her sick days, returned back to partial work. Pay was cut because they used her sick leave days. What does that mean?
Cindy, where you at?
She states here, I was told that my pay would be cut because I had used all of my sick leave days.
Well, yeah, if you run out of sick leave and you don't have sick leave, before the policy can cut, then you're not leave without pay. So yes, sir.
Okay, so she returned to work on light duty. And again, it's done.
Now, if she returned to work, she would receive compensation.
That's it.
But if she was having to be out, if an employee has to be out,
Right.
and they aren't situations that come up. Especially if you've been in the district for several years, you should have time to be able to accrue, unless you've had an emergency or something come up, and that's when you run into having the sick leave bank at your disposal for that. But yes, sir, she's right. If she runs out of leave, and she doesn't have any accrued leave, she's not able to return back to work, she's going to be leave without pay unless she's receiving workers' compensation.
Is she back to work? They looking for back pay?
What's that?
Is, she looking for back pay?
Yes, sir.
She just wants the policy change, so the next time around,
And if you remember correctly, we brought the other part to you in the board meeting, and y'all addressed that part. This is just the policy part that you
okay,
addressed.
all right, let's
So this is just in reference, this letter.
We wanted, yeah, she asked us if we would let the policy committee, she wanted to know who made the sick leave bank policy. We shared with her it's a board policy, and she wanted to know how that could be changed, and we said that the policy committee would have to make a recommendation, make the change, and then it'd be taken to the board for, just like any other board policy. So we honored her request to bring this to your attention.
Well, I look at it like, if we lived in a different world, and with the school district, if we had something through the insurance, like a short-term disability or something like that, that may have accommodated them. But with us not having, and I mean, it's hard, but I guess her point is she was injured due to someone else negligent at school. And she feels like she shouldn't have to pay for it through her PTO or, so that's a tough one.
Let me ask you, look, the 20 days, so, have to be out 20 days, right? So, let's say you're out 20 days, you've exhausted your sick leave, right? You meet those two requirements. So then you become eligible, right? When you become eligible, let's say.
Well, first of all, you have to give a date when we have an open, so if you.
Yeah, I'm talking about that. Let's say I'm in the
So
bank.
if you remember.
I'm in the bank.
Yeah.
I'm out, 20 days. Let's say I had 5 days of sick leave built up, so the first 5 of my 20 days, I was able to get it paid. But the next 15 days, I didn't get it paid. So once I hit 20 days and I don't have any leave, do y'all go back and give me in that scenario the days,
To try to make sure they don't, for the paid miss.
right, they don't miss pay, in other words. I'd be eligible for the 15 days, right, as long as I became eligible. Right, that's my thought.
But it could be on certain occasions when we get the request, and when the committee doesn't know who's making these requests, that's anonymous. And by the time they get it, so sometimes there could be a lapse where they're gonna get the pay, but it may not be on the pay.
Oh, I see. So it's hard, so that is.
So they may not get that pay period, but when it falls.
Okay.
So like the committee didn't, they try to meet as quickly as possible, but you gotta convene those people to have the meeting, scored, and when you get the request, so there could be a time where they miss their actual official paycheck, but then they would end up getting, their days later on and get that pay.
like if they build back up today,
You're replacing what you lost, and then sometimes they'll grant them what the committee will do is when they make the request, usually in there it's telling them how long they look like they're anticipating they're gonna need to be out. They'll go ahead and make a decision, hey, we're gonna offer up this amount of days based on the medical documentation they have to cover them for this amount of time.
Right, that's what.
Then if they go to the doctor and say, well, we need an extension, then they would tell them to come back with another request. And you can give up to 60 days, but typically they go based on the documentation that's provided by the doctor, and how long they look like they may have to be out for that.
how many days a person accumulates in a year?
12 sick leave.
12 sick leave days. Yeah.
Any personal day time?
Well,
Or is that just
way
vacation?
our attendance is, all of it's considered sick leave, but it's titled differently. So you have 2 personal days. Well, we don't, we have annual days, 240 employees, but everybody else has 2 personal days. They can be used at your discretion with approval from your supervisor. You could have bereavement leave, but that all comes up that sick leave pot is called sick leave. So we have different labels.
It's just a reason.
And how many that person can carry over?
I carry all the minute you.
So
But
let's
they
say,
can, but they can only accumulate up to 90 for our district.
okay,
90.
let's say the person had 90 days and used all 9. Then that person could, if they need it, they could go to the bank and get some days.
If they meet the criteria
If
of
they
this
meet the
policy.
criteria,
That's right.
okay? Now, if it's the beginning of the year, they will accumulate 12 more days.
Throughout the year, you get
Right.
one
Well,
every.
yeah. Could you count those days and get paid for
Prior.
I'm not
them?
following.
In other words, okay, I'm gonna get a day this pay period.
Right.
Okay, I needed that day off. I needed 2 days off. The next 2 pay periods, could I get that pay back and
He's
give up
asking,
those 2
he's
days?
asking if the district would advance
That's
the
what he
the
said.
yearly sick leave in the early part of the year. It used to be that way. You used to
District
get your day.
Okay, I'm just asking,
Not
I'm
anymore.
The
just asking.
district
Okay.
doesn't do that. I asked that question when I first.
Okay,
Yes,
that's
the
fine.
district
I
doesn't.
just was asking,
That's right.
So in other way, we don't have any way to accommodate a situation like this. You know, I'm just looking at if, through the insurance or whatever,
Well,
if there was like.
what I've done is, if somebody's out of days, to try to work with them if they're in that situation, we can spread out over several pay periods their days, so it's not all docked, if it's several days. So it doesn't hurt them also, they're still paying into their
Yeah, that's
insurance and stuff, so we have some flexibility there, but we have to be careful with that.
Yeah.
But we try to work with people when they have a special situation or circumstance that comes up.
okay.
So, and just for me to follow, she was out for a period of time. And of course, in this letter, it states request returning of the days or back or payment of those days missed. How many total were missed?
I have to go back.
That doesn't make, so I mean, once you miss that 20 and you pulled from the bank for whatever else, the bank, at that point,
If I remember right, not to go back and I know we talked about this in the board meeting when we brought it up, but if I remember right, she came back to work. She never got any, I think that was her issue, is she felt like she had to come back, so she didn't miss pay. But she was wanting to, and she wanted to see what the policy said, if I remember right. I'll
I
have to go
came back,
Why
I
does it
wasn't
get
ready to
recorded?
come back, but I came back because I needed to keep my grade going.
That was her explanation.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
But this occurred not under my watch now. It occurred before that, when she brought it up.
You a bad man.
And she got cleared to go back to light duty, so technically
Back at work.
if she would have been out so many days, workers' comp would have kicked in for her. We explained that to her doctor, granted her light duty, which we were able to accommodate to bring her back. So,
but the max days that any employee can pull from the bank is
60.
60, according to the policy.
And you've had some that have had big time
Yes, sir, unfortunately.
Some of
They've
them,
had serious illness.
some of them are using, several people have been approved consistently this recent.
So it's not like that, I mean, the committee is helping people
Yeah.
that need it for long-term type serious problems.
I think I asked you a question today, didn't I, about one person?
Yeah, and that, to be honest with you, you'd be surprised, a lot of districts don't even have a sick leave bank.
Exactly.
They don't have it, so I'm glad we have it, but sometimes it can be,
I had it in Orangeburg Consolidated 4, and in Manning, we didn't have it. We've talked about that.
All right. Okay, we go into policy face covering.
I'm sorry, I was just, that was sort of there for a minute, what? This policy, I'm gonna be honest with you, I know we've got it, but I think, for me personally, if we're giving children, students or parents the ability to present out of it, instead of saying, and I haven't read through this completely yet, but I think if you wanna wear one, wear one. I mean, maybe that's in here, but,
I do think we should, have the waiver, don't just let them.
correct, I agree.
That's my thought now, Cliff,
I think right now for the unknown, I think you could cover yourself with this because people may be have a vaccine, maybe not, and we can't ask if they have a vaccine or not. So if this is in a very difficult situation, it does make it better when we do have a case in the classroom, when those kids actually have their face covering, that could keep you from having to be quarantined versus the students who are not. And we actually have that in the guidelines, that if you sign the exemption, and there's an exposure in the classroom, you're out, whether you're 6 feet or not, because the nurse doesn't know whether or not they were, anything came out, anything was close by, so they automatically have to be quarantined. So we had a case today where we've got, so several, if we didn't have the kids with a mask on, more kids would have had to be quarantined, so.
how
So
loud,
it stops, it prevents that, is what you're saying.
It helps.
Mass quarantine.
It helps.
prevents that.
It does to a percentage.
Where you don't have to do it automatically. is what you're saying.
how liable we would be.
And the other piece in here is that it addresses transportation, and we haven't been relieved of that yet either. That's in this policy as well.
So how liable we would be if we didn't have the, a parent to sign a waiver to not wear a mask? If we just had it open and they didn't wear it, and somebody got sick, wouldn't we be liable for that? Possible?
You asking a question that's not been determined. So,
But I mean.
because right
you're
now, the
responsible
lawsuits
for
are going the
anything.
opposite way in the country. In other states, there are parents who are suing districts to remove their face covering requirements, not suing them because they didn't have one, and somebody got sick. So, but I mean, who knows?
Yeah, if somebody got sick and we didn't, and they didn't wear a mask. I mean, Johnny gave it to me. And you should have made Johnny wear a mask. And so that's what I'm thinking about. That's why I say.
I think the administration is not recommending
That's
that
right.
you repeal this. We just wanted to bring it to your attention to see.
The question we wanted to ask, Mr. Duffy, is on the temporary policy, when the governor released the state of emergency, we did these kind of not necessarily because of the state of emergency, but because of the situation we're in. When does the actual temporary rule go out? When we vote to stop them, unless it has a sunset clause in it?
Yes.
Well, currently, he's lifted both Band-Aids, my understanding. Masks, he's lifted the order for restaurants, for this, and
The
that.
whole, he's lifted the state of emergency, it's gone.
Period, gone,
Gone.
across the board.
But he can't control school districts.
Correct.
I think we just need to keep the,
I definitely.
I agree.
And if things change between now and school starting, and it looks like things are getting, we can always go back to revisit.
And in the effect of agreement, what my statement was earlier, if you want to wear whatever, if you don't, that's me. But when it comes to policy, as Mr. Warren was saying here, and of course, I'd rather have parents put their signature on something, and just say, yep, he's not gonna wear it, because then if they go home with a cold, and they go to the doctor says, no, he needs to be out for 2 weeks, he's got COVID, and it's
And I mean, you've got a significant population of students who cannot get the vaccine at this point
that's right.
because of their age. So, if the vaccine is good and that, that helps, but it's not gonna help that age group at this point, transmit between each other. So do y'all anticipate, like, reviewing this before we go back to the fall?
That would be my recommendation.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, Mr. Murdock, the only one into, all these are just for y'all's reference again, for us to know that they're temporary policies, we don't want y'all to forget about them, that they're not.
Okay.
But the one that we do have a sunset clause in is, GCCR,
Mhm.
and that is one that we extended the COVID leave. And it goes out June 30th. So at your 29th board meeting, we'll have, if you vote to go forward with this and extend it, or even take it away, you'll have to do what y'all did last time, suspend the
Spend the rule
rule and then bring it up so we can have it
in place by
either
July.
extended or taken away. Mr. Tindall and I talked today about it. I'd say extend it into January or December, when it's sunset again. Just because somebody could be exposed, and if they do, we've got this in there to help cover it.
Yeah, because the rule went away when COVID happened, you know?
That's a good point. And you're probably not utilizing this nearly as much
Not now.
Right,
Not
and
as we
it'll
were for a little
hopefully
while.
get less and less, right?
Correct.
But you're right, though, you wouldn't want, if somebody did get an employee got COVID in the fall, I think what you're saying about fairness is probably the best
And
approach.
they would have to pay 10 days,
That they should be entitled to the same thing that the other ones that got COVID, that's what you're saying? right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good idea. You're right.
So that's no change in that, correct?
Well, you're gonna have to vote to extend it.
Extend it.
Yeah, we had to bring it up.
No change, just an extension.
I'll make a
Like we
Just
did,
amend the date like we did before.
right, like we
Yeah,
did.
and I think you look at it in 6 months and do it 6 months after that, yeah. Well, I get a lot of questions from a lot of folks, when are you gonna get rid of the mask, when are you gonna do that? You say that. If you're asking me, I'm saying, I don't wanna wear one now, but that's me. I'm having, like Mr. Murdock, Miss Cindy, I can't think about just me, you know? Not everybody likes, peanut butter and their peach cobbler, but, I do,
I was just saying about the pecan ice cream.
So I mean, it's like, you come here to eat with me, you be surprised, if you don't like it, then you gotta go get your own, but you don't like squirrel? You don't like possums? You can go to KFC or somewhere, I don't know. But I, when it comes personally, people ask my opinion, I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna wear one when I'm in public with people that are. If somebody doesn't feel safe or feels uneasy, I'll wear one. I've noticed, and I know a lot of us probably haven't noticed, restrictions in breathing the time, but there again, it's getting older. But, when it comes to the safety of our students and our staff, suck it up, buttercup.
Well, we've always kind of been held at different, in schools,
Yes, sir.
they're always held a little bit different light.
Well, you
Mr.
go through the distance, and you have a higher standard.
Yeah.
Right.
For personnel and students and community as well. Look at our opt-out on the on-site instruction. Is that something we need to look at? And I'm just asking because I
Well,
get
but you-
confused to this afternoon.
Haven't you adopted the virtual program for next year?
That's what I'm
So
asking.
would that take the place of this? Right.
That's what I'm asking.
That's what I think.
This
It's not
was-
necessarily COVID related anymore, you had that as an option going forward, right? So they could utilize that, unless there's some segment, well, you only have it for certain grades.
We only have it for certain grades, and we're limited on who's eligible for it based on the criteria for going into that work. And we may be having some requests about virtual, but it's not my recommendation.
You're not gonna
I'm
have
gonna do that.
the COVID virtual, you're
That's
not
right.
gonna have.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so this policy will need to get addressed. So we, the next meeting,
So we'll have to
terminated.
terminate this one because it's not a COVID-related virtual school.
That's what
Well, they're not gonna have, they're saying they're not gonna have that in the fall.
we're
Not gonna have that option.
There'll be a virtual, but it won't
Assuming
be
there's
an
no
hour
more outbreak.
Won't
COVID.
be
Yeah,
anybody,
assuming that there's.
won't be anybody that wants to do it. They'll have to
If
meet
you
policy.
keep it in here, then it's almost like you're offering it,
Okay.
in my opinion,
You
to
got it?
people something we don't have. We not have carry forward.
That's what I'm saying too, same
Right.
thing, you're right,
Good
I think
point.
it needs to be removed, yeah, for that reason. So you also have JER deals with the temporary attendance requirements, that would kind of go in lockstep with it, wouldn't it? Talking about on-site
The
learning.
thing is, we have e-learning, we've been through it as an e-learning district, so either we gotta maybe come up with a new policy and maybe see what other districts and how they're handling that, but we can, if we have severe weather, instead of canceling school, we can do an e-learning for the district. So,
Well, maybe we need to look at just
you would have to have your virtual attendances and somehow incorporated in there.
taking this language and taking out the COVID-related focus to it, and putting in, like you say, just as a general e-learning proposition. Yeah, that'd be a good idea to do it that way. That way you don't lose what you're doing, but you tailor it towards what your situation is gonna be going forward.
Like hurricane season.
And we don't wanna have to, but they're thinking about more opportunities for hurricanes this year.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
That we don't miss a date.
So
That way
you
they won't
just
do
take
it.
the COVID language out of that and maybe either replace with e-learning or when the district does an e-learning day.
Okay, my only, and I think I mentioned this in the board meeting, my only issue with virtual attendance, in-person students are counted absent if they're not there, even if they turn in their work. Virtual students can log on, block out the mic, block off the video, not turn anything in until
That's-
2 days later.
That was for this policy. I think for the new virtual school that's gonna be going, they're gonna have a whole different
Good.
policy,
As long
or
as,
guidelines, expectations. We would probably need to be, even for our e-learning days,
right,
the reason they did that, Mr. Mayor, they made it very, I'll say vague.
we did,
Well, the state recommended because they didn't want to penalize a child who's at home and who maybe didn't have somebody monitoring them, but the parent working in that nighttime, they could go and help them assist them. They didn't want to penalize that child. So under the circumstances, it made sense, but it made it very, very difficult and has created a lot of headaches, a lot of issues with attendance problems, what's counted as an absence, what's not counted as an absence. But that was their rationale. And I understand that, I think going forward, we would need to make sure it's exactly what you're saying.
and that's my point, not to interrupt Ms. Simmons, but that's it, we went into this blind, and we had to do something. And I voted for all this, and I have no regret for that at all. But as we went through it, we've learned something. And it's just from parents that I've spoken with and teachers as well, and administrators that have contacted and spoken with, a little more bite in it would really help the teacher as well as the student, which in my mind is helping the student to make sure they progress along and along, so.
This follows exactly the wording, this follows exactly what the state attendance guidelines were given. So we modeled in the state school board association modeled it after what the guidelines were saying. So I know you're saying but it was really something that was given to us. that we
Right.
were-
And they didn't have no clue, they hadn't been through it, I guess it's one of those
Like I
things.
said, I've tried to understand the rationale, and I think it made sense, but it just created a lot of problems.
Bottom line is, you as a parent, and you got a child that needs to be in front of that computer, that child should be in front of that computer. And I know that there's a 9-year-old that was in front of that computer every day and doing his work every day. Because if he didn't, well, he had to suffer some consequences. That's just the bottom line.
Yes, sir.
And we as parents got to be a little better. We are. I mean, we can't just expect for everybody to hold your hand on everything, And I hate to say this, but don't tell me about not being able to log into a computer. When I see people can have a phone and they flip that phone and type on that phone so fast that I know you can type 1,000 words a minute on that thing. I'm sorry, but I just can't accept that. I just can't.
Well, the state's gonna probably go back to being regular next year anyway.
So you're clear on the changes?
Mr. Tindall, can you briefly just explain what the opt-out is, some of the requirements for opt-out? And not included, of course, this is when we were dealing with COVID, because currently the opt-out,
Doing opt-out of.
if they want to opt out and go, do virtual, I mean, we're allowing.
We've already got, we've had applicants, they've been screened. Now we have about 40, when I checked with Mrs. Williams today, who have been approved to do the virtual program through the partnership we have with the Low Country
Authority.
virtual program, yes.
And what are some of the requirements? You don't have to be specific, just in general, just.
They had to meet attendance, they had to have good attendance. They had to have performed well academically, and they must have the equipment, which they'll get from us, school district, to have the equipment to be able to do it. And they want parents involvement, okay? Because this is gonna be a pretty rigorous curriculum that they're gonna be up, so parents need to be able to help their children as well. And that doesn't mean being there every day, but being able to help their young children keep up. And if we were doing something in here, we'd probably use the same criteria, but we need our young people back in school, so.
Absolutely, and so in that, maybe this might go with Mr. Warren as well. I guess my question is for that, what is our obligation to the consortium, I guess it is, they call it?
They, we're a member of that,
Right.
but for students, there will be a per pupil expenditure that we have to pay for these young people. And it's enough that we want them to do well and make the effort, but also to do well at the conclusion of the classes as well. So I think we're doing well with that. We'll have people internally here. We can serve. I think she said we had about 4 special needs students who may have been accepted into the program as well. So we'll still have our special ed obligations to these young people that we would typically have if they were in person in the district as well. But I feel good about the requirements that they're having, and if they decide to get out, they can't get out until the end of the semester.
Now, is there any kind of obligation within our school itself? Are we supplying a teacher, or are we having to do any of that, or is this?
They've interviewed one teacher for sure from the district, and I think another one may have been interested, but I don't think she's no longer in the district anymore. But we're not giving them a teacher. What we're paying is paying for the operation, our portion of it. And you have Charleston, Berkeley, Beaufort is trying to get in that I shared with you all today, the contract that Beaufort will be in there as well. Dorchester 2 and Dorchester 4. Dorchester 4 didn't have many students who they thought would be interested in it early.
The good thing about it is Charleston had to hire a bunch of teachers, or how they were running their stuff through the year. And so they have a pool of teachers who are willing to do virtual. And so they're tapping into that pool first. And then if other teachers need to be hired, they'll hire those teachers. But right now, they feel good about the pool of candidates they have, so they don't have to pull from all the other districts. Which was a relief for me.
And our people in on the interview process. It's not just one of our teachers is represented. We have Miss Mary Fox. She's on the interview team, and that's good as well.
We got a good one in there.
Yes, sir. She's represented us well, and she's probably going to be the district contact person between that, because she's been that thus far.
I think that would be a good idea to start with. Now, our own virtual programs, are we, other than emergency aid, we're all doing
Well, so
the NC.
other than the high school, they have South Carolina virtual, that they've always, kids can have the option to sign up, which is a state virtual courses, and they'll still utilize those for credit recovery, bills, and everything. Our alternative school also taps into them, and they also have some own, who do their franchise program through virtual. So there's still some virtual options, But what Mr. Tyndall said earlier, what our biggest concern is, these parents that think, well, we're gonna just give everybody a virtual option next year. I'm not gonna send my child to school, they gonna be going at home. If you're not approved through the program, then the expectation is.
To be in classroom in a seat.
Yes, sir.
So we'll get a few teachers back face to face that we didn't have this past season, years ago, the fact we had to split some meetings.
Yes, sir.
50, might as well say a 50-50 split sometimes.
And we don't teach us teaching both virtual and, in person and that, because that's gonna cost us a little more as well. And then if we have more than the percentage, 5% of our students on virtual, we get reduced in our base student cost, which we can't afford to take that.
We can't take that. Okay, thanks. That's good information. Visitors and non-visitors. I mean, notice too,
And those are just good safe practices that we have, and making sure that we're being safe with people coming into the building. So you'd have to keep that until, kind of like everything else, kind of revisit that as we need to, but I think they're just good practices.
What about deer?
Here,
Well, we hope they don't come that way. That you out there, take care of them before they get there.
Can I go back through these real quick? I want to make sure, what we're gonna propose. As to the face coverings, the student transportation, and the maintain healthy environment, we're recommending that we continue with those.
Yes,
until
sir.
review, revisited. As it relates to the COVID-related leave and the, for professional staff and support staff, we're gonna, recommend amending those policies through the end of, December, is that right?
Yes, sir.
So we'll do an amended policy for those for the board meeting. And then as to the opt-out, we're gonna recommend repeal of that, we just talked about that, we'll recommend repeal of that. As to the, well, that's also the off-site virtual instruction, and that's the same thing that goes with it. As to the student attendance, I was looking at that, what I think I can do, and I'll pass it through y'all, is I think I could take that virtual attendance language that y'all have there and incorporate that, or maybe create something that is more to what we're talking about, taking it away from COVID. So I can work on that and present that to y'all, for y'all to look at, and with the idea that we can incorporate that into a permanent policy. And then as the visitors and notice visitors, we're recommending that those temporary policies around that, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's it. Which ones I guess I've been, or what?
If all hearts are clear,
oh, yeah.
we can adjourn.